Happy Tuesday, everyone. On behalf of AAE board member and director of professional development, Alicia Scott, it is my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the American Association for Employment and Education. Today's topic is changing the narrative, African American and Latinx educator retention. My name is Tim Newbert and I serve as AAE's executive director. Please allow me to cover just a few housekeeping matters before we begin with today's topic. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to AAE members as well as non-members who have registered. This webinar has been set up as a meeting, thus allowing our presenter and host to see our attendees and attendees to see and engage with one another. Please activate your camera if willing and able to do so. All attendees are muted by default. Given the large number of participants for today's event, please use Zoom's raise hand feature or ask to be called on via chat before unmuting yourself. You may also choose to share any questions, comments, or feedback via the chat feature within Zoom. If you or your organization are not currently a member of AAE, please visit our website, aaee.org, to learn more about our activities and resources. We are a professional association intent on positively impacting education through professional connections. Related to that mission, we connect the three critical groups involved with preparation, recruitment, and retention of pre-K through 12 educators, that being university professionals and others who prepare educators, school system professionals and others who recruit, hire, and retain them, and of course, educator candidates themselves. We offer annual publications such as the Job Search Handbook for Educators. We conduct an educator supply and demand survey each fall and winter, resulting in a spring report. In fact, the 2022-2023 survey is underway now. We co-host the careersforeducators.com job board with Kappa Delta Pi. We host webinars such as this one on topics relevant to our membership. We sponsor teacher scholarships and mini grants for school systems and nonprofits to encourage and support educator pipelines. In fact, emails announcing this year's program were sent out just minutes ago. We co-host virtual education career fairs throughout the year. We co-host an annual national working group on teacher retention with Upbeat, and we host an annual conference and education career fair each fall. Our 2023 event will be held on October 24th through 26th in Chicago, Illinois. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. During this session, we'll examine how African American and Latinx educators have historically and contemporarily been woefully underrepresented in American public schools, and how their presence and/or absence impacts the academic achievement of African American and Latinx students. Much research has indicated the benefits of African American and Latinx educators for both students of color and white students. By focusing on the oral tradition of storytelling as a strategy for the retention and in a time of shortages, participants will be able to examine the stories of African American and Latinx educators teaching in primarily white institutions. This will provide courageous organizational leaders and thinkers with a strategy to inform, support, and understand not only the experiences of, but the unique challenges faced by African American and Latinx educators. Through thoughtful interactions and discussions, this session seeks to establish a need for change in the way we examine the problem of a lack of teacher diversity and the narratives with which we hold to be true and representative, in order to dismantle the structures that disadvantage minority teachers if we hope to serve as agents of change. I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Erica Brown, scholar, speaker, facilitator, and educator, who will lead today's session. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Brown. I'll now turn it over to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Welcome to our virtual space. It's kind of funny. I said I wasn't going to tell this story, but being virtual again, because we were in COVID and everything was virtual. Then we went back live and now I'm back online. So the adjustment has been a fascinating thing. So I'm super excited to see everyone's face, and I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen and go ahead and jump right in. I was telling Tim when I first got on the call, I looked at the slides, I was like, ooh, that's an awful lot of slides for the amount of time we've got, but we're gonna make the best of it. I do want to say that I appreciate you being in this virtual space, those of you who've joined, and I'm looking forward to the conversations that we'll have today. So I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. Thumbs up if you can see it. All right. So welcome to Changing the Narrative, African American and Latinx Educator Retention. And so I'm going to go ahead and get us started and kind of lay the groundwork for why this is important. I think we talk a lot about, or I've heard a lot of conversations about African American and Latinx educators and the need to recruit them. Prepare them, recruit them, and retain them. But oftentimes what I'm finding is we are not actually hearing from the very folks that we're hoping to retain. And so my goal with this presentation is to be able to give voice to those teachers so that we can share of their lived experience in the profession so that we can start to make those organizational changes that are necessary in order to bring them in and keep them and have them feel like they're part of a community where they belong. So welcome to our virtual space. So why teacher diversity matters? I'm going to start us off there. And so when we're talking about teacher diversity, understanding that approximately 50% of American public school students are students of color, right? They're Black and brown students. But when we're looking at the number of public school teachers, more than 80% of our public school teachers are white. Right. And so there's that a lack of representation in terms of having Black and brown teachers in spaces, not only for the benefit of Black and brown students, but also for the benefit of white students as well. And so what we know is students benefit from teachers who share their racial and ethnic background, including improved academic outcomes, lower suspension rates, and higher graduation rates, right? And so when we take into account the many benefits that teachers of color can have within our educational or institution, I think it's important that we start to dig a little deeper beneath the surface to understand what is causing those teachers to leave at a higher rate than other teachers within our spaces. And so when we're looking at gaps in representation, it's particularly wide for Latinx students. So over 25% of US students are Latino or Latina, compared to fewer than 10% of the teachers, right? So we can see there's a disproportionality when we're talking about specifically Latinx teachers and students. So our goal, like I said, is to be able to engage in this conversation, to be able to dig beneath the surface, to have a deeper understanding of what are the lived experience or professional experiences of teachers of color within our spaces. So when we're talking about bringing in more teachers, oftentimes we talk about preparation. And so I'd love to take a minute to have folks drop into the chat. What are some of the things that you're hearing are happening in order to prepare a future generation of teachers? What are you doing yourself to prepare teachers? And what are you hearing here is being done? So why don't we take a minute and kind of drop that into the chat? So we got Early College Teacher Academy. So I'm assuming this is a pipeline for high school students to be able to lead them into the teaching profession. Am I correct? Let's see. Yes, thank you. We also have residencies, apprenticeships, grow your own programs within high schools, mentorships. We are seeking more diverse candidates in the teacher preparation program to begin the process of diversifying the pool. SPED, para to special ed teacher, thank you. And then so sometimes I think too, when we're talking about the preparation, I know my own experience in being a credentialed teacher. I taught for 22 years. And the whole time I was in my teacher education program, I don't think I ever had a professor. Well, I'm trying to think. did I ever have a professor of color? I don't think I ever had a professor of color. And so I wonder if it's that slippery slope of not having those folks in K through 12 that look like you, then going into college and having folks that don't look like you in a profession that you're trying to go into. If you don't have that representation, it may undermine your confidence in being able to pursue that career. So I appreciate you saying that. What about recruitment? What are some of the things that you are seeing or are doing in order to increase recruitment of diverse candidates? Internal job fairs. And I think that's really good and coincides with that internal pipeline, right? Being able to take folks that are already in your space and encouraging them to do what's necessary, but also support them as they move or change their trajectory of their career. Looking at folks with non-traditional backgrounds, career changers. We have a Call Me Mr. program at Kansas State University. Thank you for that. Encouraging students of color to consider teaching careers. Thank you. Speaking at groups on campus that have diverse students. Licensure informational meetings. College visits, MOUs, internships. Are any folks out there getting out and building those community relationships in the communities that you're hoping to draw your candidates from? And what do those connections and relationships look like? Right, it's things to think about. And so I know in the various conferences that I've attended, the focus has a tendency to be on that preparation aspect and that recruitment, right? And I think that those are where a lot of resources and effort are put. But what I am seeing in terms of a gap is really talking about retention, right? Because if we prepare them and then we recruit them, but we can't retain them, then that leads to a leaky pipeline, right? And ultimately our goal is to retain them within our organization or our institution. And so based on not only the research I've done, but the research that has been done, oftentimes when you have a conversation with Black and Brown teachers, some of the things that specifically those who have left K through 12 schools, partnering with community organizations, I love that, and the community colleges, is oftentimes Black and Brown teachers don't go into teaching for the same reasons that their white counterparts do. But in addition to that, when we look at the research, they leave for different reasons as well, right? I know oftentimes the things that kind of rise to the surface are those things that are that create that are consistent or that resonate, right, throughout all teachers. But I think it's worthwhile to take a moment to think about some of the things that are impacting our Black and Brown teachers that may not be impacting their white counterparts. And so when looking at this pipeline of how do we stop this leakage? How do we stop the loss of Black and Brown teachers once we've prepared and recruited them? When you're talking to teachers of color, oftentimes they cite the reason for them leaving is the relationships with their supervisors, relationships with their colleagues, and then also working conditions. And I know you can kind of generally say, okay, well, that could be true for Black and Brown teachers as well as white teachers. But I think as we're going through and we're having this conversation and you're able to hear these teachers' voices, you'll be able to see that when they're talking about the relationships with their colleagues and their working conditions, they're talking about very different different unique challenges that they're facing as Black and brown teachers within their spaces. And knowing that when we're looking at relationships with colleagues and supervisors and also working conditions, this really is the foundation of the organizational climate and culture. And so being able to tease apart some of the things that are happening within their spaces that are creating unappealing or a hostile or a culture and climate where they don't feel like they belong is important if we hope to retain them. Okay. I'm concerned that too many schools, districts are hiring teachers of color without first ensuring a supportive environment for teachers of color. These individuals then have a poor experience and leave teaching, and then share that experience with friends, families, communities who will then avoid teaching as well. And I am going to be honest, Tim knows now that I'm an honest person. I taught for 22 years. I thought I was a unicorn. I'm an African American woman, and I taught in science. I was a chemistry, biology, and physical science teacher. I absolutely loved teaching. I wanted to be a teacher ever since I was a little girl. And the problem was never with the kids. The problem was always those relationships outside of my students, right? And so I ended up leaving after 22 years, and the year I left, 5 other Black teachers left, and there were only 45 Black teachers in the district. And so I hear what you're saying, and I know that as my children grew up, I told them, don't go into teaching, don't go into teaching. And I'm ashamed to say, because and my son is actually a teacher, and he's a counselor as well. But teachers talk to each other. They talk in the community. And so that can be damaging to your reputation as an institution when you have teachers of color, when you bring them in and you're not looking at that organizational culture and climate. How do you maintain them, but also then people are talking about the fact that that's not an environment that's conducive for Black and brown folks, right? And so that's super important. So thank you. So what I'm going to have us do is it's going to be a brief breakout room. And so let me go and pull my questions. And then we'll tie this into the conversation. Oops. There we go. Just copying and pasting it. So I put it in the slot and then chat. Okay, so for this personal introduction, what I'm going to have you do is, and I'm just going to put you in pairs, so 3 or 4 minutes for each person. I want you to introduce yourself, do personal introduction. So I want you to give your name. I want you to give your position. I want you to give your racial or ethnic identity as you define it. And then I want you to dig into these last 2 questions. Have you ever been given a label that doesn't accurately represent who you are? What was the label, and how did that label make you feel? And how would you like other people to view you? So I'm going to do the model it, and then I'll have you go ahead and get in the breakout rooms. So my name is Dr. Erica Brown. I am an equity consultant for Equity Continuum, but I also am the Inclusive Education Manager for George Mason University in Virginia. I identify as being African American and a woman. For me, in terms of the label, I have often been called the angry Black woman. And that label really makes me sad, because what I realize is that people mistake my passion and my commitment for anger. And so it makes me very aware of, my degree of articulation, my level of volume when I'm in spaces, because I'm fearful of being labeled that way, and then therefore not being able to have access because someone else has decided that that's who I am as a person. Okay? So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And so the questions are in the chat. And then I'm just going to go ahead and form the breakout rooms. Welcome back, folks. So I'd love to take a minute to have folks share out what was it like to introduce yourself that way. Any highlights if you want to share. Yeah. How do folks feel?
I mean, I can start off. I forgot that I was supposed to raise my hand, so my bad. I'm that student. I appreciated just having the moment and opportunity to be someone else and fully acknowledge some of the things that people may have thought about me or the rumors that I've heard about myself, but also know that it's true. I'm not going to argue with it. And I embrace it a lot of the time. So I did enjoy holding the conversation that allowed me to have a longer conversation afterwards. So it wasn't just a generic, hey, this is my name. It was actually more getting to know more about yourself in a very quick way.
I love that. I love that. And then in the chat, I love this, right? Learn his story. And so the idea of being able to be in a space and tell your own story and not have that assumption made about who you are based on your aesthetics or how you show up or how you speak, and to be able to be able to tell your own story and have that ownership. Someone's hands was up, but I think I missed it. Pamela? No? Okay. We found common feelings, even though we are different people. I love that. I love that. And so I think for me, that through line is relationship and understanding how important relationships are and making that space to hear from each other in order to see the similarities, but also celebrate those differences. I love it. Thank you for that. I love it. I love it. Perspective sharing, right? Self-reflection, all those things that we know, I think instinctually are important and help us thrive within a space, and to be able to take this space and time to be able to do that is greatly appreciated. And thank you. I love that. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen again. Trying to be mindful of our time, but I'm one of those people. I lose track of time very easily.
You are not alone.
All right, so this actually, that's not the right one. Let's go here. All right. And so can I get someone to come off of mute and read the quote out loud?
I fear I may have integrated my people. Hold on, excuse me, I gotta move this. I fear I may have integrated my people into a burning house. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
All right, I love it. Thank you for that. And so what I want folks to do first, I want to ask, I'm gonna put you in a mode so I can see everybody. And you can use the emojis. I forgot there are emojis. Thumbs up or thumbs down, like thumbs up, you've heard it before, or thumbs down, you haven't. Just want to see who's familiar with the quote. Oh, there's a no now too. Love it, Zoom. Love it. Okay. Okay. And I find this is one of the quotes that very rarely folks have heard. That one and the one where he talks about bootstraps, right, are my two favorite speeches that he's given, or quotes, or information. But what I want you to do is I want you to take this quote and I just want you to kind of think for yourself. How does this quote make you feel, and what does it make you think? Just kind of that self-evaluation. You don't have to share. Just take a minute to just recognize what emotions come up for you when you hear this quote, and what are some thoughts. And so for me, these quotes really kind of set the trajectory of my conversations or trainings or webinars. When I have a quote, it kind of lays that foundation of the direction that we're going to be going in. And so as we're going through, just kind of take this quote, kind of tuck it in the back of your mind, and be able to recognize as we're moving through the space where you are seeing this quote come to the surface again, and where you're seeing it reflected in the conversation. Okay, so thank you for that. So I want to introduce, and at the end I do have some handouts and stuff for folks who are interested in reading some of the literature that's been provided. So it is the recognition of the unintended harm and taking responsibility for it. I love that. I love that. Unintended harm, but harm nonetheless, right? Because what was it, 60,000 during integration, desegregation. So when was it 60,000 African American teachers and administrators lost their job during that process? And so I remember being a kid growing up, and I was born and raised in Detroit. And if I got in trouble with the teacher, that teacher was in church with my mom on Sunday, and my mom heard about it. And so that whole idea of it takes a village. And so recognizing that those relationships that are necessary in order to support our students in their success. So it made me think about that when I saw that comment in the chat. So this is from Victor Ray. And like I said, the article I'll give you at the end of the webinar, but Victor Ray talks about how organizations are racial structures. And so oftentimes we think about organizations or institutions as these race neutral environments, but we fail to recognize the fact that these organizations are actually racialized based on the membership of the organizational members. And oftentimes depending on the membership or the proportion of the members in that organization, they set the tone for the culture and climate of the organization. So what does that boil down to? It means that if an organization is primarily white, then oftentimes the values, the norms, and the ways of being are projected through that white gaze or that white lens. And so oftentimes people of color will come into those organizations and not feel like they belong, right? And so when we're talking about organizations as racial structures and such, schools are fraught with racism. And so here are some images of some very recently of some of the things that we're seeing in different schools. So I'll give folks a minute to be able to look at the image. Actually, two of these schools, two of the pictures are from schools that I've worked with or have worked with since these pictures have come out. And so I'm just kind of taking a minute to absorb the environment that oftentimes we are recruiting our Black and brown teachers into. And if our goal is to retain them, then we have to understand that schools are racialized structures. And so therefore, they're fraught with racism. Yes, that is a noose. So the one on the my far left, I'm assuming is your far left. I never thought about Zoom mirrors. As a math teacher who was teaching some kind of acronym. I'm not a math person. And so she dressed up like an indigenous person. And then the woman in the middle, blackface. And then they're stacked, one on top, they're holding a noose and laughing. And then the one on the bottom is they have build a wall. So like I said, imagine you are a teacher of color within one of these school districts, right? And I limit it to 4. There are many more images out there of things that are happening in schools, videos of teachers saying and doing things. And I often think, okay, if that's the experience that our students are having, what is it like for our teachers in those spaces as well, right? And so understanding that dynamic is impacting not only your students, Black and brown and white, but also those teachers in those spaces, right? So being able to understand, right? Again, taking it back to that pipeline, relationships with colleagues, relationships with administrators, and working conditions, right? And so that last image, thinking about it as working conditions, but also thinking about those relationships. And so understanding that oftentimes when Black and brown teachers, whether it's urban or suburban, when they are recruited into a school site, oftentimes they're one of a few, right? And so even if there is a high degree of minority or minority student presence, oftentimes those teachers are still one of a few, which leads to high visibility, automatic notice, discrepant stereotypes, and many other behaviors that lead them to not feel like they belong, right? And ultimately impact your ability to retain them, right? And so when we're looking at it, close that out. When we're looking at it, oftentimes teachers will point to feelings of marginalization, experiences with microaggressions, and also experiences with racial stress. And so just being able to drop that into the chat. And so when we're looking at this, teachers of color face unique challenges in schools where they teach, including racial discrimination, stereotyping, lack of collegial respect, increased workload, and invisible labor. And so all those lead to feelings of marginalization, the experience of microaggressions, and then ultimately racial stress. So I'm just going to do this and pull this over. So I have it in the chat for you. Right. So racial battle fatigue. Racial battle fatigue is a psychological, emotional, and physiological energy and time related to cost of fighting against racism. So that social, emotional, physical toll of being in those spaces where those racist acts are happening. And so thinking about back to those images again. And then finally, and the reason I did it as stepping stones is so they are experiencing marginalization, microaggressions, and racial stress that leads to that racial battle fatigue. And then oftentimes that leads to professional pushout or burnout, right? And so meaning that they're being systematically forced out of schools due to a lack of support, encouragement, or an inclusive environment. So teachers of color, as we can see, they're faced with unique challenges, and as such, they're leaving the field at a rate 24% higher than their white counterparts, right? And so again, if we can see the importance of, or the significance of having Black and brown teachers within our school sites, how it benefits not only our students of color, but also our white students, it becomes an imperative to understand their lived experiences within their professional environment in order to reduce the number of teachers of color that leave the teaching force. So what I'm going to have us do is, and I'm going to do, I think it's like 4 minutes. I'm going to play an audio clip. And so while I'm playing the audio clip, what I want folks to do is, and this is kind of taking stock yourself. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you listen to the audio. And then as you're listening to the audio, what I want you to do is I want you to recognize how the audio makes you feel and what it makes you think. Okay. So emotions first, thoughts and feelings. And then once you've recorded those thoughts and feelings, then what I want you to do is I want you to be able to identify. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up. So as you're listening, which of the voices is talking about marginalization? Which are talking about exclusion or self-isolation, or feeling invisible or feeling hyper-visible, feeling like they have to work harder or being held to a different standard, dehumanization, devaluing, or stereotyping. Thank you, no worries. So I want you to keep that in mind. And so what I'm going to have folks do, if I can find my cursor because it keeps leaving me. What I'm going to have folks do is, those of you who have your camera off, I'm going to go ahead and have you turn your camera, or who have your camera on. I'm going to have you go and turn your camera off, and then that way you kind of you're in the space to be able to really absorb and process without being viewed. And then once we're done with the audio, what I'll have you do is I'll have you turn your cameras back on. Okay, so I'm going to give folks a minute to go ahead and turn their cameras off. All right, thank you. And so, like I said, how does the audio make you feel? What does it make you think? And then try to identify some of these pieces that you may be hearing as you're listening to their stories.
That is why I work so hard to dispel the myths of the Black man. Lazy, shiftless, late, etc.
I always have to make sure my actions are above reproach because it's not me who is being judged when I'm not successful. But if I am, my success doesn't represent all Blacks, just my failures. While my Caucasian peers get judged as individuals, I'm representing my whole race. I feel that I must show that I've earned the right to be where I am and that it was not given to me.
So for me, that's a big driving force professionally, serving as a role model to students, because I went through the same experience growing up. I've gone back to graduate school and I got a doctorate degree. And I always tell my students, I did it not because I wanted a new job. I did it because I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know a master's degree existed, much less a doctorate. And I don't know anybody with those degrees. And I want you to know somebody with that degree. I want you to know what is possible for you. And I don't think that exists for every teacher.
Well, we also become advocates for the parents because a lot of them don't speak English. And so parents feel like, well, Senora M is the only one who can understand what I'm saying and who will be my voice.
It's like there's such an insidious trend, especially in a lot of education research, where they talk like, oh, it's just because you're a minority that you're good with students of color, but they forget and they discredit. I'm a really good teacher.
Parents frequently don't realize I'm the teacher. In fact, they assume if anyone else is in the class, aides, parent volunteers, whoever, they automatically think they are the
Say
teacher.
what I want to say, or I can't be direct.
I went to a conference recently, and the majority of people in the conference were Anglo. And there was this sort of preconceived notion that I didn't know as much as they did.
So for me, teaching is different than for my partner. Well, he does everything in one language. I had to figure out a way so that I can do it in English. And then if my students don't get it, I have to do it in Spanish. And if they don't get it in Spanish, then I have to do it in English. So it's like double the work, you know? You see, I have 3 strengths. African American students are immediately intimidated because they think, oh, she's African American, until they listen to me speak Spanish. And then they're like, oh, no, wait, she's Spanish? Just your physical appearance, just your ethnicity can be an influence, you know? When the kids look at you and they see, oh, look at that. She's Black and Spanish, and she's a teacher. Yeah, I could be a teacher.
I had some students a couple of years ago ask me just randomly, what is the difference between a Chicano and a Latino? And I said, okay, cool, let's talk about it. Let's learn about it. And they loved it. So we talked about it. I made time every day for 30 minutes for us to talk about that stuff. I have 2 master's degrees. I consider myself to be an educated person because I push and I drive for it. And I know I can bring something to the table. And when those leadership opportunities come, I don't feel like, I literally have to prove myself, whereas another person doesn't have to. And I've seen that firsthand.
So you're told to think outside the box, to get your students vested. And when you think outside the box and get them interested in something, oh, that doesn't align with the standard. But you could take them to the museum to see something about their culture, about their race, about their heritage, and tie it into a lesson. And it'd be something that is relevant. No matter what your ethnicity is, you need to be able to see. Some teachers ask, well, what are you doing this time? This white teacher was like, well, what are they reading? And how does this align with everything else? I said, they're invested. They care about it and they're learning something that's important to them. No matter what your ethnicity is, you need to be able to see.
Students were experiencing a lot of racist microaggressions from teachers. If this teacher didn't care, then they weren't going to care either. And they just failed on purpose. I talked to the principal and I told him that I wanted to do a lot of work around how to work with students of color and what microaggressions were and how detrimental they can be to students, and to start conversations about that.
No matter what ethnicity you are, you need to be able to see these children as humans. You need to understand that their parents are probably doing the best they can. And if they're not perfect, don't call them and tell them the first thing about how awful their child is. they're still a parent. The day that we stop complaining is the day we need to get out, because that's the day we just don't care anymore. There's a constant battle too, and it becomes uncomfortable when you're the only one who is pointing things out. Anytime you speak up, you're perceived as aggressive, adversarial, non-compliant, defiant. Well, we also become advocates for the parents because a lot of them don't speak English, and so parents feel like, well, Senora M is the only one who can understand what I'm saying and who will be my voice.
All right, so just take a minute to be able to recognize how those audio recordings, how they made you feel and what they made you think. So just take a minute with that. And when you're ready, go ahead and turn your camera back on. All right, thank you for that. And so just take a minute and after listening to those stories, listen to those voices, and those were a limited number. I have more than 30 voices that I usually bring into a space to be able to have a conversation, but how might these incidences impact the recruitment and retention of BIPOC teachers? I'd love to be able to kind of close out with that question. Yeah.
I didn't know if we were sharing verbally or written, but I know I talk too much and I don't want to type that much.
Yeah, please, thank you. I love the voice.
So I know for sure what I was hearing are narratives and lived experiences as well. And that's the worst part about it is that these are truths in essence that we still go through it even in 2022. Usually when I have to present, I make sure I bring up historical facts that are still relevant to this day. And that's the harsh reality is that this is nothing new that we see these aggressions because there's nothing little about them. These aggressions continue to stifle people's passion, creativity, and whether or not they want to stay in that environment. And it damages the culture because now I'm not safe and I'm not willing to collaborate with you because you're not willing to anticipate or appreciate what I'm bringing to the table. And I always have to defend not only myself, but I have to defend my entire race. And that makes it a lot more challenging to come in and do the job I'm hired to do, which is to teach. Because now I'm being a representation for an entire demographic of people that may or may not even have elected me to do it. And I say that just because that is stuff that I deal with, but also that is why I'm so intentional when I go out to recruit and find people of color, whether you're Black or any other color. I'm going to be biased when it comes to Black, that I'm going to intentionally make my way over to talk to you, shake your hand, give you the attention that you should deserve, that anyone else would have gotten just because they walked by. Sometimes we have to do it a little bit different just to make sure that you know that you're seen and you're present and you deserve to be able to feel that way. And I let people know that even if you don't want to take the opportunity here with me, let me help you somewhere else. So if there's anything I can do to help you elsewhere, please just come back and let me know. Because at the end of the day, I know wherever you choose, you're going to face some of the same narratives and struggles and experiences that I've already faced. And I would love for you to not leave the entire education industry because what you face right here.
Right, right. And so I think you bring up a great point, and this is something I don't think I ever get to is the recommendations, right? The recommendations that African American teachers make or teachers of color in terms of what they would like to see changed. And part of that is will obviously not to experience this. However, they also point to a lack of mentorship and sponsorship in the space. And sponsorship meaning, I'm gonna put your name in for this, or I'm gonna stand and say, hey, I know you can do this job, so you get that job, as opposed to mentorship. I'm gonna teach you how to do something so that hopefully someone will recognize your genius and promote you or give you praise. And so I love that. Thank you. In the chat, microaggressions are like death by 1,000 cuts. Yes, yeah. Maybe one other person, would anybody else? I never do a number. Whenever I do a number, then I never get anybody else to say something, but maybe one more person, and then I'll go ahead and wrap us up. I feel like people are frozen.
I'll say something. I don't know, my hand is up. Is that okay?
I am one of those people. Yes, please.
So I guess I'm kind of going away from the question, if there was really a question. I think one of the major issues that we're dealing with is while we as Black and Brown people are concerned about things that are being said, how we're being perceived, why we can't recruit, we are now dealing with the other side of the pendulum, in which Caucasian people are now being very concerned about anything that comes out of their mouth. Their livelihoods are being attacked. And so when you're talking about the recruitment, it is not sensitivity, it's overly sensitive situations that you're being presented with. And so that creates a whole different pendulum swing where everybody is either afraid to say too much, afraid to say too little, afraid that it will be misconstrued, not misconstrued, and that's on everybody's side. So when you talk about recruitment, retention, all of those things, the ability to communicate, the open environment to communicate misunderstandings, being misunderstood, and that being okay, it can dictate the way all of that goes.
Agreed completely. Because if we're not willing to have, so there's an article, and I don't think I put it in this folder, this resource folder. It talks about calling people in instead of calling people out. Because when you call someone out, all you're doing is pushing them away from the very knowledge that they need to take in, because you're hoping to either, you don't know if you're planting a seed or watering it, but if you don't engage in those difficult conversations, then that person, I always think about shifting hearts and minds, right? And so my goal is not to change you, but it is to offer you another perspective so that you know something beyond yourself. And I think oftentimes when you call people out, it just, like I said, it shuts them down, and they may never say it to you, but that doesn't mean it's changed their heart or their minds. And so I appreciate that. And I think it's a delicate balance. So it's super important. So I'm going to go ahead and end us with, let me see what the chat says. They were overwhelming, but also helpful for me to better understand the realities by teachers, people of color. I intend to be more sensitive to these issues as a result of this session, and I greatly appreciate that. And that's my goal, is even if it's just one person, is to be able to not only to honor the teachers that let me interview them by giving them voice and giving them the space to share of themselves, but also the opportunity to support people in deepening their understanding and their knowledge. So this is a quote from Gloria Latson-Billings. There's something that may be even more important than Black students have Black teachers, and that is white students having Black teachers. It is important for white students to encounter Black people who are knowledgeable. What opportunities do white students have to see and experience Black competence? Right. And so oftentimes we talk specifically about Black and Brown, but knowing that contact theory, by increasing your contact with people you deem to be the other, oftentimes you find more similarities than you do differences, and that can create an opportunity to start to deconstruct those stereotypes. And so with that, I did it almost. And I really appreciate, so I have a survey if you're interested in completing it. All the articles that I referred to as I was doing the presentation are in the resource folder. And then if you want to contact me, and that's all I've got for you today, but I appreciate your time and your energy and your willingness to participate. So thank you.